is the New Hampshire team that actually started the grassroots writing campaign for Joe Biden. And so, what I said to you yesterday, and what I'm going to say to you today, is what on earth were you guys thinking when you started this?
Go ahead, Colin.
The New Hampshire primary is something we take really seriously, not just politically, but also as a civic tradition. And I was a little worried, a little concerned, a little angry at the DNC for putting us in this position. And I thought there were some really stupid political decisions that led to this. But a lot of us just decided that we're not going to take no for an answer, and that when an election happens, voters vote and organizers organize, and there's no telling us not to. And Terry and I and some others kind of took this into our hands and said, the New Hampshire primary is happening in late January, and there's no way we're going to pretend it's not or tell people to stay home. Either of those just feel so fundamentally wrong for the values that we hold.
And I think we also were a little bit, to be fair, I think there was a little bit of concern there. Like, what happens if we tell people go out and write him in because he wasn't on the ballot, and he doesn't do as well as he ended up doing? So we knew there was a little bit of a risk there. But I think that kind of irritation just gave us the momentum and the passion to do what we needed to do. New Hampshire has incredible participation in democracy. We have very high voter turnout. We have, people show up for town meetings. And so we just thought it was really an important and scary moment, and that the New Hampshire primary would be the first day of the general election campaign. And so it was going to be really important.
And so then the two of you decided that you were going to do something about it. So after the fear wore off, what happened next?
Well, to be clear, and Colin and I do say this often, we may be the two faces here today, but this was truly a grassroots effort. There were probably about 20 people on the kind of, maybe I would call it a steering committee. We didn't really have a name. And, hundreds of people across the state that stepped up to figure out how are we going to, A, let people know that Joe Biden would not be on the ballot, because a lot of just average voters didn't even know that. How will we let them know that they can and should vote for him by writing him in, and how can they do that? And that's what we set out to do.
So I'm imagining that sounded like a really tall order. So he's not on the ballot, and you guys got to figure out how to get everybody to write that in. And you got 20 people working with you. So what's next?
Well, so it started as just a group of us on Zoom calls every week. So we kind of divvied up like basically volunteer responsibilities, like who's going to work on organizing, who's going to work on finding events that we could send a speaker to, who's going to work on getting signs, we didn't raise a lot of money. We raised about $70,000 over the course of 3 months. And it really was grassroots level organizing, people calling people they knew, as opposed to kind of the big programmatic version of fundraising. But we got a website up. It was all volunteer driven. We ended up with 1.5 staff people, but nobody was hired for the first month. So it really was a lot of just figuring it out as we were going. I will say, I think one of the superpowers we had is, there's really not a big line in New Hampshire between what it means to be kind of an activist or an elected official or party person. So Terry, for example, Terry used to be Speaker of the House here in New Hampshire. Terry also was a state rep. I served in our state government. I was the Democratic nominee for governor in 2016. But to be clear, Terry's state rep district represented what, 3,000 people? I mean, there are 400 legislators in New Hampshire. They're volunteers. They don't get paid. So in our state, the line between activists and community leaders, a really soft and blurry one. And that actually means a lot of us felt empowered to just like roll up our sleeves and do it, rather than asking anyone for permission.
So let me ask another question because I want to back up just a second. You guys said you raised $70,000, which doesn't really sound like a lot of money for all the work you had to do. And so talk a little bit about that because we tend to think that money is everything. So can we just hear a little bit about the money that you raised and how you guys felt the best way to use it?
So I think because this was so grassroots and I don't want to say disorganized, but it wasn't hugely organized. We used the money primarily for two things. One is the 1.5 staff people that Colin mentioned. And the other was signs, and more signs. And that's where most of the money went. Of course, we had to, create the pack and things like that, but that's where most of the money went. And we would do, initially, we would do Zoom calls with all of our volunteers, not just with the 20 of us, which we did every week, but with, 150 or 200 people who would just get on and come up with ideas. They would say, we think you should do this. And our response would be, you is all of us. So if you've got that great idea, run with it, right? That's what grassroots is. It's really empowering people to do what they want to do, what they're good at doing, what they, are creative about doing. And I think that's why it worked. And I think that's why the outcome was so great, which I would also add is why I was really excited to hear that Tom Suozzi's campaign actually had a grassroots coordinator, because I think so many campaigns, especially the more national ones for the US House and Senate and President, they forget that part. And so it becomes very top-down driven, and people don't want to participate because the campaign might not be offering what they want to do. Well, so what? Go out and do it anyway.
So let's talk about that. So you've got all of these volunteers and you've got different communities, and so people want to do different things that they think work for their community. Can you guys talk about what that looked like?
Yeah, so I'll show you an example, actually. I have this on my desk. So this is a little palm card. It says Vote for Democracy, January 23rd. It has the write-in Joe Biden with the name, a little bubble filled in. On the back, it has a sample ballot where it has Joe Biden written in on the bottom, has the paid for on it. So these came up because a woman named Stephanie in Claremont, New Hampshire said, hey, for the last local city council race, palm cards were really helpful. Can we do some? And I basically said, go for it. And she said, well, what, who's going to pay for it? How are we going to, what's the disclaimer? And I said, look, I'm going to send you the FEC website that addresses that section, but I can't give you advice on this. You guys got to figure it out, but you have the resources there. Talk to some other folks. They raised, I think it was $500 to make these. It just has someone's name on the back. There's not a pack. It just says paid for by George Chait. Then 2 other people around the state heard about it, and she sent them the file for these so they could make them for the Dartmouth campus and for one of the other communities. And there ended up being an NPR story about these palm cards nationally, where Stephanie's talking about how she came up with the idea. And that's just one example, but like TERIE could give you 20 more of those. It was one of the truly beautiful things about giving people the freedom to not have someone tell them what to do, but to say, your community, get to work.
And I think that's, for me, I started out in the grassroots, reproductive rights, doing grassroots for reproductive rights. And for me, it was really amazing to come back to the grassroots, because that's what's so exciting about it, is that so many people, there's no monopoly on good ideas, right? And so many people had good ideas, and all we needed to do was encourage them to follow through on those ideas. And for all the people that are on this podcast or listening to this podcast, you've got great ideas too. So you don't have to wait for a campaign to tell you to get a group of people together and do it.
Wow, that is just amazing. So for those who might just be joining, we have Colin Van Ostern and TERIE NORELLI from the New Hampshire Write-In campaign. And this is just amazing. I am just so inspired already. So let's just sort of let's just take this from the top. So there's no Joe Biden on the ballot. You guys are going to make sure that he's on the ballot, and you're going to have to write it in. So now you've got 20 volunteers, and then you got hundreds across the state. What's next? What
Well,
do
I
you
think
do?
we knew we had to do two things. The first was get the word out that he wasn't on the ballot, but that people could still vote for him and how. And then the second was just spreading that and getting volunteers. Our second big thing was to get volunteers to staff the voting locations with write-in Biden signs and sample ballots. And so we had people that just reached out and said, yes, you can come talk to our group. We reached out, said, hey, we have people that are willing to come talk to you. Let us know where and when. And they would let us know. And we would find mostly from the 20, but even beyond, hey, will you go talk to this group about this effort? We had hoped to, and it was a big hope, to get 50 opportunities to speak. We had more than 60.
So I love the story about the signs because you guys had to make a lot of signs so talk a little bit about how all that happened and how folks came together to make those signs.
So, for the record, I don't always believe signs are the answer. It's kind of a long joke in New Hampshire about people asking for more signs and not. It did really make sense in this case because write-in campaigns are very unusual. No one here had participated in one before. And yet showing up at the primary really is a civic tradition. People take their kids. My kid's school is closed on that day. So we knew a lot of people were going to show up, but might be confused. So we really wanted to get them at that moment. We knew that they were there for a reason, but help them visually see the fact that the president's name won't be on the ballot, but that it's easy to write him in, how you can do it. And so we had the idea of having and we also thought, frankly, it's just a good way to organize. There are 303 polling locations across New Hampshire. And so that way you could have kind of somebody in charge of finding volunteers for each one. And then above them, someone for the region, kind of a volunteer phone tree. What came out of the volunteer calls that we did, well, TERIE, you want to explain the kind of how we ended up with the sample ballots and the QR codes?
So, well, when I say great ideas, so somebody emailed me one day and they sent me a QR code that they created that would take people directly to the Write-in Biden website so that they could get the information they needed about how to write them in. And then the other issue was sample ballots are really helpful. In New Hampshire, though, every voting location has a different ballot because they rotate the names. So we couldn't just take one ballot and reproduce it across the state, but it was pretty expensive to have individual ones. And so somebody came up with the idea to kind of blur the names so that you could take one ballot and make it something that could be replicated for every polling location. So in addition to the write-in Biden signs, typical signs that we had out on lawns and at the polls and everything, we also had a sample ballot. And both of those were ideas that just came up because somebody was on the Zoom call and said, hey, I'll do this.
It just seems so passion inspired that people were so engaged and motivated. Any ideas about what you think push people to be so inspired, except the two of you and all the other 20 people who started all this?
Well, I think Colin talked about that a little bit in the beginning. If people knew, if they followed kind of the politics of things, they knew that the DNC wasn't recognizing New Hampshire's primary, which is in our law and run by our Secretary of State. So that primary date wasn't changing. And so that gave us a little bit of passion, like, we'll show you why New Hampshire has the first primary, like, because we do things, right? And so I think that was part of it. And I also think that people were afraid, right? They know that Biden has done so many good things that the stakes in this election just could not possibly be greater. And that, as I said before, the primary is the first day of the general election. And New Hampshire is a swing state. So what happens here in November is really important. And so I think all of those things, and the fact that it was grassroots, that people got to step up and do what they wanted to do, those were the motivating factors, I think.
Can I just
I
add one thing also?
Yeah.
You know, this also, like, I think it's why all of us are on this call. Our democracy itself is at stake.
Yes.
And I think there are a lot of people who realize that, people who get looked on or discounted by pundits and political parties, sometimes, frankly. And so, like, a lot of what motivated people was the stakes of the election and the fact that we knew we were going to be the first votes counted in 2024. We had a responsibility. Doesn't matter what a political party tells us. Doesn't matter how many editorial pages, you know, look down on the idea. And they did, to be honest. Everyone was saying we shouldn't do this. It was good for our democracy, probably also really good for the New Hampshire primary to show that we participate no matter what and that we're stubborn and we care about the issues that are at stake.